It is a good morning. A good morning to you, a good morning to be here, and for right now, at least the weather has cooperated. I welcome you not only here on this morning, but also to say to you, Happy New Year. Happy New Year. I have not turned one page too many in my calendar, nor have I been into the communion wine. Last Sunday, we closed out year C of our 3-year cycle of readings. This year, we begin that rotation again. So we are now on the first Sunday in year A of those readings. For the last year, the predominant gospel that we have heard from was Luke's. We'll tuck Luke away for at least until around Easter time. And our principal gospel for this year A will be Matthew. Matthew. The 29 weeks that we have spent with green altar hangings have now been replaced with the royal blue of the ancient English church. Some places use the more recent color scheme of using purple for Advent. But being the historical creatures and the traditionalists that we are, we go back to the blue of ancient England. We omit the Gloria in Excelsis. I mean, we went all out today. We omitted all the music. Wasn't planned that way, but that's what happened. On this first Sunday in Advent for year A, which we are now in, all of the gospel readings are labeled as those that come from a particular type of literature. It's called apocalyptic eschatology. I look forward to this Sunday every year so I can just say apocalyptic eschatology. Apocalyptic eschatology is what my son says, oh, you know, that end of the world stuff. End of the world stuff. And indeed it is. Our Old Testament lesson for this morning from the Hebrew Scriptures is from Jeremiah. It's written in the 6th century B.C., at a time when the armies of Babylon were massed on the borders of Israel, Judah. In the year 586 BC, those armies crossed the border and invaded that tiny, distraught little land. The city of Jerusalem was leveled. The temple, the center for their entire life together, became rubble. The ruler of Israel at that time was forced marched to stand on the steps of the temple while they killed his 3 sons. And then they put out his eyes. Needless to say, it is a day marked in infamy in the history of Judaism and of Judah. So it is that the disaster for which Jeremiah was the documentary has these words in it. In spite of all that had taken place, in spite of the destruction, the killing, the forced march back into Babylon, hear what he says. The days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will fulfill the promise I made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In those days and at that time I will cause a righteous branch to spring up for David, and he shall execute justice and righteousness in all the land. in the midst of that destruction, in the midst of all of that tragedy, in the midst of all of that sorrow, there is that lone voice saying that the Lord will prevail. The Lord will prevail. In somewhat a similar vein, some 600 years later, Jesus is addressing his disciples. And again, it is a foreboding prophecy. What he says to them is, there will be signs in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth distress among nations, confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. How would you like to turn on your radio tomorrow morning and hear that proclamation? The announcer saying, the days are surely coming. The days are surely coming. Now, there may be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars in his day, but I'm not so sure about our day, although if you believe most of our scientists, there are signs in the sun and the stars and the moons. The seas are retreating. The polar ice cap is melting. And God only knows what is going on in the nation's capital. I heard a mother say in the grocery store the other day that her son said, Mama, what does impeachment mean? A second grader. What does impeachment mean? Most Americans know nothing of Latin or the Latin language. It's even called a dead language. But I bet you right now that most Americans know 3 words of Latin: quid pro quo. The news commentator announces all of those things. The polar ice cap melting. All of our tragedies, natural and those of mankind. I turned on the news the other day, and there I recognized the scene because I had been there and had walked it any number of times, the bridge over the Thames. Except on this day there were police vans and there were bodies on the ground, folks having been stabbed. That's our world today. I think that on this first Sunday in Advent, we need to be reminded that we live in what one writer calls in-between time. We are in between time. Each of us is in between our birth and our death. We are living in the present time, influenced to a great extent by our past. Everything from the genes we inherited to the influence of our parents determine to a great extent who we are and what we are. And yet we're also influenced by all of our hopes and our dreams. Where we would like to be, what we would like to see happen, what we choose for not only ourselves but for our children. We're influenced by all of those influences that we have experienced in our own lives. As I grew up and went to college and later, there were 2 men in my life besides my father who had a profound influence on me. One was a priest and the other was a professor. Now, spent all these years in academia, teaching, or in some form on a college campus and in parish churches. All of us have those folks and those influences in our past that make us who we are today. Hopefully they are good influences. And yet we also know there are some that are not. So here we are together on this first Sunday of Advent. I suspect that all of us have the same basic desires. Among them, and probably the strongest, is our desire to be in charge of our own life. I talked to my son this week a couple of times, who's in the process of making major changes, moving from one place to another, building a house, structuring his job a different way, and feeling good about it. I said, "You seem awfully pleased." He said, "I kind of think I'm in charge." We are to some extent, and in another way it is an illusion. There's that wonderful American Express advertisement that says, "With that card, I can change my entire life and be in control of my finances." I happen to have one of those cards, and they lie. Isn't what we want in our modern world to do and to be is to be in control? I suspect that all of us deep down want to be in control of our lives, be in control of our destiny, be in control of our surroundings. We've learned to control the world to a great extent. Look at the terms we use. We have population control, we have climate control, we have birth control. Are we in control of our lives? On some days, maybe. We would love to be in control of everything, but we're not. We make plans for what it is that we desire, not only here and now, but for tomorrow and the next day and the next year. Every single one of us, consciously or unconsciously, has some idea of the plans that we want. Plans for the little worlds we live in. And yet our plans often get interrupted. In the midst of all of our planning and calculations, the phone rings. A beloved one is in trouble. A friend has gone to the doctor, and the report is there's a spot on your lung. Those days when we are in control rejoice, but there will also be the day that will be proven to be an illusion. Having been so successful in controlling the world around us, we often hear the other side of it. The polar ice cap is melting. The oceans are drying up. All sorts of things that remind us that we really aren't in control. Like all of you, I celebrated this past week for Thanksgiving, but it reminded me of 2 or 3 years ago, when I spent Thanksgiving with my son and son-in-law and my daughter in New Jersey, Kathy and I went into New York City to go to the 9/11 Memorial. The 9/11 Memorial is something each of us ought to have the opportunity to see. Because you see, among all the other realities of that, it is a reminder that there was a time not too long ago when we thought, as citizens of this country, that we were in control. The world was of our making. And then on that morning of 9/11, all of those illusions about being in control were shattered. My son-in-law was scheduled to report for work to a new agency on the 15th of September in the North Tower. It brought home that reality that the world is not in our control much of the time. And Advent, it seems to me, is a reminder that you and I live in what the writer calls the in-between time. We are in between birth and death. We're in between where we are and where we would like to be. We are in between our self-assurance and our fear. We all live in between time. And we wait. Those lessons we read a few minutes ago are about waiting and living in between time. Many of you know that I don't wait well. I think one of the greatest inventions of the 20th and 21st century is the Kindle. I always have my Kindle with me because when I wait, at least I can sit and read. I do not wait well. Once again, I was reminded, I've mentioned this before, but a number of years ago when my son was diagnosed with osteomyelitis, that's a staph infection of the bone marrow from a football injury. Rushed to Piedmont Hospital. Fortunately, I had an orthopedist as a good friend who met him there. Within 2 hours' time, he was in surgery. And I began the march. Couldn't sit still, so up and down the halls I walked. Until I bumped into another friend, a physician, an internist. Asked me what I was doing, and I told him what the situation was. And he said, "Come with me." We found the surgical suites. He got on the phone, and for the next 2.5 hours, talked to a nurse in the operating room. Gave me assurances. Sat with me. Until he was sent back to his room to recuperate. So we wait together. That's why we're here. In one real sense, we're here because we wait together. And that's what Advent is about. Paul tells his beloved parishioners in his first congregation, that small band of folks in a little place called Thessaloniki. He says we wait together. That waiting is not a solitary event. That waiting is a corporate endeavor where we strengthen and encourage one another. faith is not about an individual state. Faith is about relationship. Relationship with one another and relationship with God. We call it corporate faith. We begin our prayers, not I. We begin all of our prayers, we believe. We who wait together. We all individually and sometimes collectively go through those times of faithlessness, even despair. The treatment for despair, disease, if you will, is corporate worship. The treatment for despair is corporate worship. It is for being right where we are. That's why we begin our creeds. We believe. We believe. That we all go through those times of faithlessness. Sometimes we even go through despair, individually and collectively. But corporate worship is our treatment. It's our treatment. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, some of you know of, a Lutheran pastor in Nazi Germany, spoke against the Nazis, had come to the States to teach, could have escaped all of that in his homeland and chose not to. He went back as a public figure, the best known theologian of his country's day, and wherever possible, cathedral or street corner, proclaimed that the Nazis were wrong. He was arrested in 1942 and in 1943 was killed to shut him up. Hear what he says about Advent. Celebrating Advent means learning how to wait. Not all can wait, certainly not those who are satisfied, contented, and feel that they live in the best of all possible worlds. Those who learn to wait are uneasy about their way of life, but yet have seen a vision of greatness in the world of the future and are patiently expecting its fulfillment. The celebration of Advent is possible only to those who are troubled in soul, who know themselves to be poor and imperfect, and who look forward to something greater to come. For these it is enough to wait in humble fear until the Holy One Himself comes down to us, God and the child in the manger. Amen.